In this video, I'll talk about the need for rules, why all rules are wrong, and why we should use them anyway. So a rule is a pattern. It's an articulated pattern that, if it's a decent rule, responds to data. So if we look at the image here, we might say that the rule is, let's change this to white. The rule is that, the leaves are generally in the upper portion of the tree. So the rule is the leaf is in the upper portion of the tree. And so that's what we're going to do. Now, why do we use rules? Well, it's mostly about processing capacity, meaning we could just count every single leaf in every single situation and respond to the actual leaves, meaning we could look at the world as it is in each moment and respond to it. But that takes a lot of bandwidth. It doesn't give us a sense of control, and we don't know what to expect. We're responding moment to things in many directions. So what a rule does is it takes that 360-degree continual focus, which in a fearful reality, now a fearful reality is a painful reality because all fear rests on the foundation of pain, right? Meaning the only thing that we fear is some form of discomfort, great discomfort, or pain, whether it's emotional, mental, physical, financial pain. That's the source of all fear. And in a painful reality, where you don't want to feel pain, you're afraid of feeling more pain, you're scanning, you're looking around to find, how do I avoid feeling pain and how do I feel better? And if you're looking everywhere all the time, you've got high anxiety. And so what we do is we take this 360-degree kind of innocence of the child, the naivete of the child. And what we do is we break it down into slices. And then we pick certain slices that are relevant in a certain moment. So for example, when we're driving, the rule is stop before you hit the car in front of you, follow the light, and stay in your lane. That's it, right? And you're no longer in the now, you're no longer, in the vastness of the present moment. You're just following those three rules. Look at the light, stop sign, stay in your lane, the right side of the road, based on wherever you're driving. And that's where the mind goes. Now, the body can be trained so that you can be off thinking about other things, but, rather than tell someone, do the right thing while driving, and just put people on the road with those instructions, what's the right thing here? You give them a narrow focus of things to just do this and you'll be fine. Now, so that's the rule and that's the purpose of the rule. Now, we also know that it's not the case, right? You can follow the stop sign, follow the red lights, stay in your lane and not hit the car in front of you, and you can still be washed away in a tsunami. You can still be blown away in a hurricane. You can still have a volcano drop some molten rock on you. You can still have a semi-truck drive across 6 lanes and kill you. So the rule isn't correct. It's not perfectly correct. So what's a good rule? So a good rule, first of all, takes the possibility field, the probability field in its vastness, and it reduces it to a slice that is manageable. And by manageable, it just means that anytime you're startled, anytime you have to react in the moment, anytime you're asked, okay, what's the rule? What do you do here? You can focus on something you can get inside your brain and take effective action on. It has to be small enough for that, right? You can't have a rule of, divide pi by 368 multiplied by this, I turn right at the intersection. Stop here, right? You need a rule that you can manage, which means dumbing down reality to a set of a few pointers that seem to make the most difference. So that's the first qualification of a rule. Now, a computer can have a far more complex rule, and if you've got a lot of time, you can develop all kinds of philosophical rules. But for responding in the moment, like what's the rule, if the house is on fire, what do you take and what do you leave and all of those things. You want a set of rules that you can digest and take action on in the moment. So that's the first which means it's, like 1% of your human experience. So it's a small sliver. Now, the other thing is you need a rule that is better than no rule. So here we're into a probability field, we're into statistics. You need a rule that, if you apply the rule, has better results than if you wing it or if you do random things. That's the basis for a rule. So first of all, you can remember it, you can do it, you can focus on it. And secondly, when you do, your well-being increases statistically relative to chaos, relative to what you would do otherwise. And your pain decreases statistically. Now, that's a good rule, right? It's better than nothing, so it's good. Now, the best rule is still within your ability to grasp, but creates the highest likelihood, the highest measured likelihood, right? So in order to know what statistics are, you have to take measurements, right? So the statistical pool consists of what has been measured. If nobody's measured it, you don't have statistics on it. So, we have an intuitive measure. We can look and, like, if we're looking at something and we see there's a big fire over there and we see all the cars driving over there are catching on fire, and then over there, nobody's catching on fire. We don't need to know exactly how many cars have caught fire and exactly how many cars are doing fine over here to know that we want to take this road. That's an intuitive measurement. That's okay, that isn't. More people who do this are getting rich than who are doing this, right? So we have an intuitive sense, and that's gifted to us, but it can be distorted easily. We can have a small data set, etc. So then we have things that have been actually measured, right? Of all the things, this is the best way to build a road. Of all the different things, this is the best jet engine. It's been measured. You look at the fuel consumption, you look at how long it lasts, you look at how many newtons of thrust are coming out the rear end per gallon or liter of fuel, and you say, this is the best engine, right? And then you weigh it against the cost, and you say, well, this engine is the same price, or it's $10,000 more, but it will save $1 million of fuel over its lifetime. So it's the best engine for these certain things. So in order to pick a rule, you need measurement. Ideally, neutrally gathered, without a bias, without an agenda, a data set that is comprehensive. And the bigger the data set, that is relevant, the better, right? If you can say what's the best way to build a road in this country, if you measure all the roads in your country, you would say, okay, this one. And that's good. But what about the best way to build a road in the continent? It's going to be better. And what about the best way to build a road in the world? Anywhere in the world. This is the best road that's ever been built, right? Based on cost, based on maintenance, based on, impact on the environment. Like, what do you measure, right? Because that also ties into there. Because a rule is supposed to benefit someone. Otherwise, why impose it, right? So all rules are supposed to provide benefit. All benefit can be measured in the form of decreased suffering and increased well-being for some group, right? But what do you measure, right? This might be the best way to place a road for maximizing fuel efficiency. Like if we go up this hill and come down, we're going to spend a lot of fuel going up the hill, and then a lot of brake pads are going to be worn out going down the hill. If we go over here, it's going to be smooth. But what if there's an endangered species going around there and there isn't over here, right? So it all depends on what you measure. Every rule is good for something, and it's bad for something else. And so the perspective, that we're talking about is usually what's good for humans. And what's good for humans is also what's focused on, right? Because we might say, and this is a cultural bias. Like we focus a great deal on saving time, particularly around business. And so having established that as a norm, that saving time is really, really important, then we consider this as the best way. And you ask why? Well, it saves time. Right. But what you measure around a rule has to be questioned, right? In other words, if your goal is not to save time, but to enjoy every day, and this road takes you through a horrific tunnel, with fumes and dim smog and lights, and you could drive an extra hour and have a scenic route that's very meditative. Or if you could drive an extra 3 hours and take the bus and really listen to your music experience or chat with a friend without worrying about safety. Or have a profound experience and take a hot air balloon, right? It depends on the goal, right? Which is defaulted into various cultures. This is the best way to do this. It's straight. It's this. But it may not be your personal thing, right? So the values have to be established. And then the measurements need to be taken in relationship to those values. So, you establish your values, speed and cost, right? In a capitalist framework, speed and cost. But what about maintenance? Okay, that's part of cost, right? So you have cost right now and cost long term. So you'd look at those metrics and then you would say, okay, this is a better way to do it than that for these three values. But each person is ultimately responsible for picking their values. Now, then you can assess which rules will increase the likelihood of moving to those values. So the next thing to understand is that every rule is wrong. And the reason for that is, you may develop a rule like this, right? You could say, okay, that's the rule. Up and down by 1 inch, right? You say that's fine. And you can say that if you do that rule, statistically, you're going to get these benefits. Fair enough. But you're not going to deal with anomalous events, meaning the world is more complex and bigger than any rule. Doesn't matter what it is, right? Now you could say, okay, well, gravity has been constant, but since when, right? Where was gravity before the Big Bang? if you subscribe to that theory, right? So a lot of rules are time and context based, and we only know the data sets that are observable within our senses with our current instrumentation. But I think it's a good hypothesis, it's a pretty safe thing to say, that there is not any rule that is absolute, meaning independent of all time and context, right? You know, at the very least, you go back to before the Big Bang, and you can't say that the laws of physics were necessarily working before then, right? So what if there's another bang, right? What if there's a small bang, right? What if that's a cycle? So that's you know, and the other thing is, even if you see things that are pretty stable, you know, that they've been stable within the framework that you've measured, that's a pattern. But patterns are nested within patterns, which are nested within patterns, which are nested within patterns. And so there are big patterns that take, you know, 1,000 years. And you may not have known about that. There are other patterns that take 100 years, and you may not know about that. But, you know, what tends to happen, and you can look at this like with gravity, where, you know, you have a tide moving here and then there, but every so often, a number of planetary bodies kind of overlap, you know, in a lineup with the moon, et cetera, and create a slightly higher gravitational pull, and there's an unusual tide. Or the Earth spins in a certain way. And so what I'm saying is that even though many systems appear very, very, very stable, there are fluctuations as very long cycles collide with small cycles and change the wave pattern that we've been you know, measured, and take us into slightly unfamiliar territory. That's one thing. The other thing is, like, you can have rules, like you might tell your child, put your head down, don't date, finish your degree in school. That's the best policy. You don't want to get pregnant. You don't want to get someone else pregnant. You don't want to miss your degree because of a summer fling. So statistically, right, you look at all the children that focus all their time in school dating, and you look at all the children that buckle down and get their PhD or whatever it is. Statistically, you can say that, you know, that's a good rule if you want someone to get a degree, right? Which you could say is a good idea if you're going to college. Now, but what about the most magical moment of your life, right? Life is ultimately about well-being. What if you meet the love of your life in college and you don't acknowledge that, you pay attention to the rule, right? What if you break each other's hearts by not paying attention to that? You follow the rule. You're now heartbroken. You have regret for life. And what if the synergies that you might have created together are phenomenal, right? What if the business you would have started together, or what if you have a creativity that would spark something that could change the world? You see, those are also in there. They just happen more rarely, right? So the default rule is this, and generally speaking, casual fling versus degree based on measurements of income or career path, you could say that on those metrics, generally speaking, you'd put the degree ahead of a casual fling. But what about something deeper? What about that? So what I'm getting at is all rules are too limited to address the complexity of reality, which is why it's sometimes more dangerous to have a rule without knowing its statistical data set. For example, you might say that 60% of people who avoid romantic relationships and finish their degree do better than 40% of people. But that there's fully 11% of people, or 50, 49, 40, and 11% of people that do extremely well putting their relationships before their degree and networking throughout life in a very great partnership with certain relationships. And they have a talent for picking those relationships. And their talent for that is greater than their talent for getting the degree, for example. Right? So you have to know the data set so that when you come to a decision, you can have a sense, is this part of the 11%, the 40%, or the 60%? In other words, you don't want to have a rule that you don't know when to break, right? Because that's a prison. Because there is no absolute rule. You're dealing with a statistical probability field. So you need to know why the rule is there, what its purpose is, what benefit it offers. Because some rock-solid rules just offer a 10% benefit. You absolutely have to do that. Why? Well, it has this benefit. Well, how much is the benefit? 10%. So you mean if I break this rule, I have a 80% chance of going down 10%, but I have a 20% chance of what's the upside? I have a 20% chance of doubling something that is important to me, right? So you need to know that statistical thing. Like if I quit my job and go to follow my passion, for example, what percentage of people who do that have a higher quality of life in 10 years or 20 years versus someone who keeps their job and does a passionate hobby? That is a very important statistic to understand. And the rules around it are only useful if you understand the statistical field and why it's there. And understanding why it's there is often an important stepping stone to breaking the rule intelligently. Which brings me to my last point, which is that all rules over time are edited, refined, the complex relationships to it are added or are discarded, right? If you go back, 10,000 years, there's very little remaining of the rules of those days. Make sure to curry your horse after a quick run so that, it doesn't sleep wet. It's not really relevant today, but 1,000 or so years ago, that could be a central point of the day. Now it's what? Make sure to watch the news or cut down on carbohydrates. 1,000 years from now, there may not be what we think of as carbohydrates in the way that language may be too archaic relative to how nutrition is formulated at that time. Right? Other terms may be far more relevant to well-being, and the term carbohydrates may be rarely used. But it's relevant today. It's a rule to say cut down on refined carbohydrates and sugars in order to lose weight and cut down on arthritic tendencies, for example. So we'll leave it at that. Hello, I'm Dane Rose, and I want to begin by highlighting one of the most shocking things that I've discovered at age 47, which is that no one has, and perhaps no one ever will, introduce me to life. No one's ever sat me down at any point and said, this is how life works, this is why it works. These are the most important aspects of life. And I find that incredible. Now, when that thought occurred to me, that 700 books in, that hundreds of courses in, that decades of introspection and learning into this life, I still didn't have a formal introduction to what this is all about, right? It seems absurd, right? So there's a moment of criticism. Why hasn't anyone pointed these things out, right? And it's fun. The adolescent's job is to criticize the inevitable and innate imperfections of everything, including the cultural blind spots that see so many of us going through life without knowing what's going on. But it's the adult's job to do something about it, right? The world is not perfect. The world is not fair. And if something bothers us, what to do about it? And this book, An Introduction to Life, is my response to that critique, my response to that irritation, that imperfection in my life. And although there are well over 100 chapters, it's the biggest book, naturally. It's a big topic that I've ever written. I thought I'd just randomly pick a few of the chapters and, you know, to get a little bit of a sense of what's involved. So on the first, the first thing we've got the big picture, evolution. We've got the 4 operating systems of the brain, the 4 brains, and the protocols they use to filter information and make decisions. The sociopathic or reptilian brain, the rational or pattern organizing brain, the empathic brain and its decision-making protocol, and the transcendent brain, right? Now, that's one of the most revolutionary understandings that I've come across that nobody introduced me to. If we go on to 3 random pictures or windows into the book on the next page of the contents, we've got the ego, self, and breathing. We've got chauvinism and its cultural underpinnings. We've got optimal roles. We've got PTSD, a stunning thing that I didn't learn about until I was 40 years old, that has more than a 30% invisible influence on every person and on the culture as a whole. The culture and its cult-like nature, how it can be our enemy, how it can be our friend, what its role is. We have cult and ego architecture, just going into that a little bit more deeply. The next page of, another 50 chapters, we've got key cycles in life, things that you want to be aware that repeat themselves over and over again, that have throughout history, the history of humanity, and will continue to repeat themselves. What are those key cycles and how do we attune to those? Emotional literacy, right? What is an emotion? How is it different from a feeling? Now, in a psychologically illiterate culture, we don't know the difference between an emotion and a feeling, as evidenced by the fact that you, as a representation of the 99%, cannot articulate it clearly. And if you do, your articulation will not agree with the next person. Feelings and emotions, right? Positive and negative emotions. Are they the same as good and bad? Like all of this, any one of these things takes years to understand with wisdom and depth, right? But in most cases, we don't even know that we don't know about it. Grounded to reptile, right? Why we regress to the reptilian brain in traumatic states, right? Why our tether is the oldest brain. Purpose and meaning, how do we organize it? What is meaningful and what is not meaningful? Do you know the core ingredient in meaning? How to increase a life of meaning, how to decrease a life in meaning, right? Every question is a quest, and what are the quests that you're on? That's another page. 2 more tables of content pages. The deepest cuts to our humanity, right? We all live in a cult, in a culture, with a norm, a normal pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And how do those norms undermine the human operating, which is the empathic operating system in our brain? Understanding the math of cultural impact, investing in our future, individually and globally. Losing oneself. What does it mean when we say we lose ourself? What is that self, right? And when is it good to lose ourselves and find a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being? And when is it a disaster? When is it a crisis to lose ourselves and perhaps regress to an older pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, being? We have advice, criticism, and direction. Some tips, right, in life. Get excellent at something. The circle in life, right? Why is the circle the most fundamental shape in geometry, in the liminal space between masculine and feminine, between duality and the one? Learn from nature, right? When wrong ideas are right, right? When does a wrong idea take us in the right direction for our sustainable well-being? It's not true, but it takes us to a better place. And in those instances, do you cling to what's true, or do you value the improvement that comes to your life? So a very light dive into the table of contents. But my belief from thousands of conversations, hundreds of books, talking with various teachers, etc., my belief is that if you are exceptional, right, if you are an architect of ideas, if you understand the building blocks of consciousness and ideas and the way they create the illusion of our reality, that you can read a book like this and spark 12 or more % of new gestalts, of new configurations, right, of your consciousness, of your frameworks. You can iterate, you can evolve. If you're a naive teenager, as I was, 90% of this is useful grist for the mill, new populations of consciousness, of ideas, right? If you're an average middle-aged person, as I am, 30% of this, if you'll skim the chapters and highlight, ooh, there might be something there for me, there might be something there here, there might be something there, and then come back and actually read those chapters that speak to you, or use it as an I Ching and open up to something. That there is going to be things that you didn't know that are useful, that can propel you to a better quality of life. And that's what makes a book an act of love, right? It's an act of creativity. But love, is a process. You have the love of need. I need you, the infant. Right? You have the love of desire. I want you, the adolescent. But then you have the love of giving. First to ourselves, adult love, and then to others, right? I'm still learning. This book was a gift for me. Someone introduced me to life through this book, right? And 30% of the ideas catalyzed have had a positive impact in the course of articulating and writing, etc. But they may also be fruitful for you. That's the gift of the information age of technology. It's not either or. Right? Once I wrote the book for me, I can print more copies for you without diluting. Right? It's a gift to me to talk with someone who's read this book as opposed to someone who hasn't. Right? So, loving enough to care, caring enough to take time, taking enough time to see, seeing enough to understand what is being seen, understanding enough to empathize, to transcend the rational brain into the human realm of empathy, understanding enough to empathize, and empathizing with understanding enough to attune, and attuning successfully enough to succeed at facilitating survival, security of survival, a sense of love and belonging, self-esteem, the articulation of ideals and the paths that take us towards those ideals, called principles or best practices. And the respect we earn by following the best practices that create the world that we state that we want, right? Earned love, self-esteem. By developing our gifts, discovering what they are. I'm good at math. I'm good at listening in a way that people say things they've never said before. Discovering my gifts. And then bringing those gifts deeper and deeper into the world in a way that creates abundance for myself, for others, that creates value. And finally, serving something, becoming a part of something bigger than ourselves. That's adult love, and it's a process of blossoming, right? And if a book facilitates self-awareness, understanding, empathy, facilitates action that leads to increased survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, discovery and development of our talents and gifts, bringing those into the world, and becoming part of something bigger. If it does that, we have succeeded at bringing a profound state of love, a transformative state, a useful state of love, an adult state of love into the world.